Today, we're going to break down one of the most complex, most audacious military plans ever dreamed up, Operation Overlord. This wasn't just a plan for the D-Day landings. It was the master plan, a single massive operation that would literally change the course of the entire Second World War. You've probably seen this image 100 times. A sky just full of barrage balloons, a sea completely choked with ships. It's a picture of pure, overwhelming force. But this single moment, this point of impact, was really the final product of years of meticulous planning, a lot of painful lessons, and some absolutely incredible ingenuity. Because, let's be real, that's exactly what the Allies were up against. By 1944, Nazi Germany had turned the entire coast of Western Europe into what they called the Atlantic Wall, a fortress. And the question that was keeping Allied commanders up at night was as simple as it was terrifying. How in the world do you crack that nut? So, let's get into how they actually pulled it off. We're going to look at the immense pressure they were under to even try something this crazy. Then, how they chose the battlefield, the unbelievable web of lies they spun, the wild technology they literally had to invent on the fly, and finally, the ultimate coin toss on the one thing they couldn't control at all, the weather. First up, you have to understand the sheer pressure of the situation. Since 1941, Joseph Stalin had been hammering the Allies, demanding they open a second front in Western Europe. Why? To take some of the heat off the Red Army, which was just getting chewed up, bearing the absolute brunt of the fighting. The pressure was intense, but so was the risk of a failure that would be completely catastrophic. And, this one quote from Field Marshal Alan Brooke, one of Britain's top military minds, man, it just says it all. There was this deep skepticism at the highest levels about whether this was even possible. But at the same time, there was this grim acceptance that they had to try. The stakes were just that high. Which brings us to problem number one. And it's a big one. Where do you land? You can't just throw a dart at a map, right? The location had to be this perfect sweet spot, offering a real strategic advantage, but also a chance of actually succeeding. So it really boiled down to two main options. First, you have Pas-de-Calais. This was the obvious choice. It's the shortest hop across the English Channel. The problem? The Germans knew it was the obvious choice, and they had turned it into the most heavily defended piece of coastline on the planet. Then you have Normandy. It was less fortified, offered a much wider front to land on, but, and this is a huge but, it didn't have a major port. And without a port, how are you going to supply the millions of soldiers who need to follow? In the end, they took the gamble. They chose Normandy. The final plan laid out a massive assault by 5 infantry divisions across a 50-mile stretch of beach. The Americans were slated to hit beaches codenamed Utah and Omaha, while the British and Canadians would go for Gold, Juno, and Sword. Okay, location, check. But now for maybe the craziest part of this whole thing. How do you gather the largest invasion force in human history in southern England without your enemy, who's just across the water, figuring out where you're planning to hit? The answer was something called Operation Bodyguard. And honestly, it sounds like something out of a spy movie. It was probably the most ambitious, most successful military deception plan ever. The goal wasn't just to hide the real invasion, it was to actively convince the Germans that the main attack was coming somewhere else entirely, right at Pas-de-Calais. And the methods they used were just pure genius. They created an entire Phantom Army, the first U.S. Army group, and even put the famous and feared General George Patton in command of it. They built hundreds of inflatable tanks and dummy planes, broadcast tons of fake radio chatter for German listening posts to pick up, and used double agents, most famously one codenamed Garbo, to feed a steady diet of bogus intel right to the top of German command. But even with the perfect secret and the perfect lie, you still have some huge, practical problems to solve. Remember that massive drawback for Normandy? No port? And what about all the minefields, the concrete bunkers, and the machine gun nests waiting on the beaches? Well, the solution to the port problem is one of the most audacious engineering feats of the entire war. Just mind-blowing. The thinking was, if you don't have a port, you build one. Or, in this case, 2 of them. These giant, floating artificial harbors, codenamed Mulberry, were built in total secret in Britain, all so they could be towed across the channel and assembled right there off the coast of Normandy. It's just incredible. And to deal with the nasty surprises on the beaches themselves, They came up with this whole zoo of bizarre, specially modified tanks. They got the nickname Hobart's Funnies, named after their creator, Major General Percy Hobart. And each one was designed to solve a very specific, very deadly problem.
I mean, check this out. We're not just talking about regular tanks. They had tanks with giant rotating chains on the front to beat the ground and set off mines. They had flame-throwing tanks to just roast fortifications. They even had amphibious tanks that could be launched from ships and literally swim to the beach. They were inventing the tools for the job as they went. Okay, so you've got the army, the secret plan, the ghost army, the crazy inventions, everything is set. But then you run smack into the one element that no general, no planner, no matter how brilliant, could command: the weather.
The whole thing was supposed to kick off on June 5th, but a massive storm rolled into the English Channel. The seas were way too rough, the clouds too low for the bombers. At the very last minute, the invasion had to be postponed. Can you imagine the tension in that room? Then, on the evening of June 4th, the meteorologists came back with a tiny sliver of hope. A brief gap in the storm was predicted for June 6th. The pressure on the Supreme Allied Commander, Dwight D. Eisenhower, must have been just unimaginable. But after hours of agonizing, he made the call with 3 simple words: "Okay, let's go." And just like that, the switch was flipped. The gears of the largest invasion in history began to turn. On that first day alone, nearly 160,000 Allied soldiers would cross the English Channel, a staggering number of human beings about to charge in history. And to get them there, an armada of more than 5,000 ships. I mean, just try to picture that. From battleships to tiny landing craft, the sea would have just looked like a solid carpet of steel. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of warfare. But for the guys themselves, the actual soldiers at the tip of the spear, like these British paratroopers, this was it. The secrecy had been so total that most of them had no idea where they were going. They weren't told their true destination until they were already on their way, just a few short hours from jumping into combat. General Eisenhower, he knew exactly what this moment meant. In a letter that was given to every single person taking part in the invasion, he captured the sheer historical weight of their mission. He told them, "The eyes of the world are upon you." And they really, truly were. Operation Overlord was an absolute masterpiece of planning, a breathtaking mix of strategy, deception, engineering, and raw courage. But it was also one of the greatest gambles in modern history. It was still just that, a plan. And as the sun began to rise on June 6, 1944, the only question left was what would happen when that perfect, intricate plan finally collided with the brutal, bloody, and unpredictable reality of war.